Throughout our session this afternoon, you will be able to engage through the chat. Feel free to say hello as we get started. We will reserve the Q&A for any questions you have pertaining to today's topic. So you have two ways of engaging with us: through the chat to say hello, to share information with other attendees, and we will reserve the Q&A to discuss questions relevant to today's topic. So please check out those two spaces as you need them. Today, we will be following the topics listed here. So we will be going over best practices for lesson planning, data analysis alongside your lesson planning. We will discuss depth of knowledge, or DOK, as well as data analysis best practices, and we will end our time together with some news and updates. I am Terra Jason, and I am the Curriculum and Learning Design Manager here at eduphoria, and I am joined by Emily Cram, one of our product managers, and we will be guiding you through this discussion today. So we'd love to start off with you participating in the chat with us. What superpower would you want to have? I know my classroom superpower was always voice recognition. It came in handy with my 8th graders very, very often. But here we have some options: the power of flight, super strength, or maybe a flamethrower. So what would be your ideal superpower? Let us know in the chat.
We're going to go ahead and start talking about best practices for lesson planning and roll you into that. So if you were the foundation of our lesson planning is going to come from Forethought. So we do have an application that is dedicated to lesson planning. So that's going to be where we house these best practices, but they can be applied to other tools that you might be using, or other forms of lesson planning as well. And this is one of my favorite topics. So I'm sorry, like these next 4 slides, I could really do almost a whole training on several of these. So I'm going to try to keep it minimal and keep good use of your time. So in our lesson planner, we're going to cover, like we said, some of the best practices and some of the things that are heavily used and loved. So one of the first that teachers absolutely love in the Forethought lesson planner is that when you view your standards, they are color coded. So if you are a tested grade level, yay, you get to see that your standards are color coded for you. So the default is red is readiness, blue is supporting, and green is process. But if you work with Terra and she helps you in any sort of training, Terra likes to recolor code hers and she adds yellow. So she likes to add that because it aligns with lead forward. And you can do that at the district level. You can change those color coding, but it's very helpful as a teacher to know when you're identifying standards where they fall. And that visual is amazing for you to be able to see that and grab those standards accordingly. Another feature that is amazing related to our lesson planner is attaching resources. So I worked in a previous district that used to wipe our drives every summer, which was very scary. And you didn't have some of your resources that you created. Or I always joke, but am serious. If you don't use a good organization system in Google Drive like me, then finding resources can be very difficult. So when you attach a resource to your lesson planner in Forethought, then automatically it's searchable. You can search, you can find it, it's there, and it's complete with your lesson when you're ready to roll that lesson over into the next school year for time efficiency. So attaching resources to your lesson planner is outstanding. We also, like I had alluded to, we have some copying features, which are amazing. And my favorite, I actually do have 2 favorite copying options. One is in the picture in the bottom right. So we don't have the luxury as teachers very often to be able to say, everything that I did today, I'm going to do some form of that tomorrow. That's not the world that we live in. So with the lesson planning feature in Forethought, you can actually take and copy one of your actual content areas, and you can move it over to other days within the week. So that feature is amazing for you to be able to to create a structure on Monday and say, okay, I am conceptually covering these for the week and make a copy of it for time efficiency. So we love anything that is time efficient. And my second favorite option is shifting lesson plans. So if you haven't looked at our shifting of lesson plans feature, it's amazing. We used to joke that it was for a snow day, but how many of us have days where we're like, wow, today was a little crazy and nothing went the way I planned? Well, by shifting your lesson plans, it holds all that content and it bumps all your lessons one day out. So amazing copying features that you can utilize within the planner. And the last of our best practices here is being able to plan in different ways. So very much of us as educators are very particular about what our lesson plans look like. It's a process. And maybe you like to plan by the week. Maybe you are just a daily planner, or maybe you have multiple courses that you prep for, and therefore you need to plan by course. We have 3 different options for those types of people to go grab whatever fits your personality best or whatever fits your schedule best, to be honest. So we do have those options as well. And I love those because I talk to a different person a lot and they say which one is their favorite. So those are great options to use. Our next is going to be some continued best practices that we have. And so here we're talking about some of the functionality of the lesson planner. That being the very first one is checklist items. You'll see an example of that in the screenshot below where it says writing across the curriculum. If you have a district initiative that's going on of any kind related to curriculum and instruction, you can create checklist items. As a teacher, this is great because it's one less thing I have to think about. I can see that checklist and say, oh yeah, I need to make sure that I do have a reflection or some type of journal entry for writing across the curriculum. And I can easily check that box, and it's a reportable feature. So you can check on yourself and make sure that you're adding that. So anything that you have as a practice instructionally works great as a checklist item. Our next is default text. And if you've ever sat in a training with me, I really harp on default text for your lesson planner because I see many, many teachers still that are retyping some of the same structure to their lesson plan daily. And nobody likes that. Nobody likes to have to retype things more than once. And so I tell teachers all the time as a best practice, if you find yourself typing something every single day, set it as the default text. You can really not do any wrong here. You can change your mind as many times as you want for what the default text is. It just allows you to then on the next day, when you open up your lesson planner, all of that is already there for you. So now you're navigating through what you actually need to type for this lesson plan rather than structural things or procedural things or, the 3 bell ringers you use every day. Type them in, delete out the one that you don't plan to use, and that saves you time. It's easier to delete than to retype a full sentence. The next piece that I absolutely loved and trained teachers on was you do have the ability to add, I call it reflections. That does sound a little bit deep, but you can add reflections to your lesson planner. One way to do this is you can just add a text entry box as a part of your planner, or if you go and utilize the picture that shows kind of in the middle of the screen with the calendar with the plus sign, if you see there, it says add a new special entry. That will add a special entry text box for you. And this best practice for you may occur, for me, working with teachers, it was once a week. And so you may want to add it more, but you can choose when you would like to add that box. And the concept behind it is you can type, here are the things that went well this week for my lesson plans. Here's the activities I liked. Here's the group structures I liked. And here's the list of things that didn't go well. So next year, when I teach this concept again, I'm going to be sure I don't do it this way because that wasn't successful. And by adding these reflections into your planner, they copy over next year. So when you're desperately looking for that Post-it note that you wrote it on and you can't find, it will be in your planner automatically as a special entry. So love that action item for teachers to be able to use. That becomes just more and more pertinent if you're like me and you can't remember things that happened yesterday. So additional pieces we have is adding RTI content. So that's become a big one with House Bill 4545. If you are teaching an intervention course, whether that's before school, after school, whenever in your traditional day, you can add it to your lesson planner, and therefore you can build the content that you're covering. For your sanity, we're going to cover later on, but this is all reportable. So when you can't remember exactly how you taught something, you can go back and you can find it. And then you can compare it to data analysis to see how students did based on your instructional practices. So again, a lot of that has to be documented for these cases, and it needs to go into a form or some sort of communication for students. So this is a great piece to have in your lesson planner and refer back to. Then another piece that I absolutely loved and utilized with teachers is you do have a scope and sequence tab on the left-hand side of Forethought. So at any time, if you're identifying, feeding off of that intervention, if you're identifying a student at a lower level, you can go view your scope and sequence and see, are they at a third grade level? Are they producing more of a second grade level by being able to look at those skill sets that are identified in your scope and sequence tab with all the standards? That's just an easy way to pivot yourself to find and navigate some information to help you identify where we are, where we were, and where we're going. Okay, so some additional highlights, and this is going to be a lot of information and a lot of good ideas actually in this particular, whoops, I went too far, in this particular slide. So this one is kind of us taking all of the different exciting pieces we've heard from districts and reiterating them to you. So there is an activities and a resource section where you can add activities. So it can be multifunctional. You could add an activity from your lesson plan. There's a little widget type tool in the upper right-hand corner of your lesson plan, and you could click on that and add and save an activity. So if you are looking at your lesson plan thinking, today was great, today I was successful, and maybe it was just, third period math, but you're like, hey, third period math was pretty amazing. You can save that whole activity and it will go to the activities tab for you to utilize in the future. Or share out with other people as well. So it's pretty multifaceted. Or if you're at the district level, then you can create these activities. You can tie them to the scope and sequence. And then when you're looking at your standards on the right-hand side of Forethought, which you can kind of see in this screenshot, this one has the Atom family, an activity associated with 8.5A. And so that has been added and shared out for all teachers who teach this 8th grade science curriculum for them to be able to add this activity to their lesson plan because it was successful. So there are districts that we work with that if you're using Forethought, teachers roll in and they have resources already provided for them of activities they can use in their lesson plan. So an amazing resource. I know we talked as a group and a lot of us used to do this with the instructional technology lesson plans that we had, and we would add them to the scope and sequence. So a great tool to share out. It's really the sharing and the wealth of these skills that's amazing. Another area that you can share very well is the team planner. And so here you can, the original plan and purpose of the team planner was for our K through 2 friends who get to teach every single content. And that's a lot of planning. And so the team planner was originally just purpose so that those teachers could then kind of divvy off who's over math, who's over ELA, who's over each of these content areas, and share out some of that planning responsibility. But what we have found is I work with another district who they build all the lesson plans for their elementaries in a team planner, and they can go and they have access to a team planner immediately after being hired and setting up their own. And they can go grab all of those lesson plans and pull them into their own lesson planner, which is phenomenal. I didn't originally think of that as an idea, but it's a great way to utilize a team planner. I have also worked with a district that used a team planner for curriculum mapping. So they were very, very big into the curriculum mapping process. So they would go back in at the end of the unit, and that's where they would type out those reflections for what they would do differently next year or how they would readjust their scope and sequence based on what they learned. So that's a great place for that collaboration to occur. You can also do, of course, PLC notes, agendas, and a team planner. Keep record of that. Again, your principal has access to it. And so that's a great place to keep any sort of notes and discussion items. And in addition, you could create an intervention team planner. So if you are having to share responsibilities for planning intervention, that could be part of a team planner that you share out some of those, especially if it's not an area that you're intervening in that you're used to, then you may need some team support in that particular area. This one is related to some of the checklist items. I've worked with districts in the past that they do add some of those T-TESS lesson planning dimensions as checklist items. So we showed that in a previous screen where you could have some of those writing concepts that you check off for your lesson planner. Well, the same goes for T-TESS. If you're really looking at moving your lesson planning from proficient to distinguished, you may want to know how that criteria looks different. And you could provide that in the form of a checklist, which is a great way for teachers to just click and say, oh, here's the difference between proficient and between distinguished for lesson planning. And that would easily be viewable instead of having to find a third-party resource. Then another one that we all loved as a group at Eduphoria, we had discussed this just last week. The idea of activities for creating some ELPS lessons is very helpful. So in those things we absolutely have to be doing. And it would be amazing if there were some activities that were already available in your scope and sequence for ELPS so that you could add those in your planner. And then the last really good idea that I love is teachers who are thematic or conceptual planners. You may not remember, well, here's a great example. The ELA standards just changed, or RLA, there it is. They just changed, right? We just got to live in that world of changed standards. But if you had created activities and you titled them based on a theme or based on a concept you were teaching and you tied them to standards, it's a lot easier to navigate through any sort of transition related to standard changing, or it's really easier on your brain to say, this is how I taught this theme, this concept last year. So again, that activity section leads itself to a lot of planning resources and supports that can help teachers. We have some more from a lens, and this is the last of the best practices, but it's from the lens of the principal and the leadership. And so what are some things that are great for any leaders on your campus or at the district level to know related to lesson planning? And the number one is that making notes in the lesson planner is huge. It's the first thing I always tell principals, instructional coaches, APs. If you have access to view a teacher's lesson, go tell them that they did a great job. Give them that feedback. If anyone sees you in their classroom, they're going to want to know what your thoughts were. So you can easily add a note onto the lesson planner and you can say, I have an example here. Great job. Things I love, things I wonder that I saw today. That will be the first piece that the teacher sees on their lesson planner. It's a big red box that they will see immediately when they log in. So that's a great piece to add anytime you're viewing some classrooms. Some other places that are amazing is every team planner has a chat section. I don't know how many of you use that if you're team planners, but you can go in and you can chat through a thread with each other about lesson plans. And so as a principal or as a leader, I could go in and chat on your team lesson plans and leave you notes, leave you reflections. Any of that is great because it also sends out an email to let them know that you had these thoughts and you went in and reviewed their plans. As a principal, it's always amazing to run a standards coverage report, which we're going to talk about in a little more depth in the next section. But this ideally will just show you, here's third grade math. Here's how many times each of these standards have been covered. And you can see date stamps associated with that. So it's a great report to run, especially if you just gave an assessment. That's a huge piece of knowledge. Again, adding those checklist items that we had mentioned to help support teachers with implementation is amazing. And anything that we don't have to keep in our brain that is automatically in the lesson planner there for us is great. It's a win-win. And then last is my favorite of all is that in the forethought lesson planner, if you have management access to manage those forethought options, you can go in and you can color code the standards, which is great. This was a practice I just started taking on in my previous district. And every year we had a practice at the beginning of the year of identifying low performing standards. So how did we do compared to the state? And we were lower than the state. Why do we think that is? And we always identified those in red. Of course, it couldn't be a different color, right? It had to be red. And so in forethought, you could color code those standards as red, and they would just show up with a little paper indicator with a red dot that you see on there. It doesn't change those shading options. It just adds a little circle to the piece of paper next to the standard so that it's identified. And you can have several different criteria where you label some different areas that, hey, this is where we were performing above the state. This is where we were below. This is definitely one that's highly tested and we perform lower on. Whatever areas you would like to indicate, you absolutely can with those markers that are customizable inside forethought. So I have just talked for a long time about some best practices. I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions, if there's anything that came in, or if Terra, you would like to add anything.
All questions have been addressed in the Q&A. I would just like to state at this point, I hope some of the high level takeaways that you are seeing right now with the lesson planners in forethought is there are a lot of opportunities for collaboration between teachers and their instructional leadership. And there's also lots of room for autonomy to build in that reflection so we can take care of our future selves by planning well today, reflecting on what that looks like. To bring some of the different components together, it could be a great practice in a weekly PLC meeting for everyone to open their lesson planners, take 5 minutes of reflection to add those notes for themselves, and then that can launch some rich conversation for the individuals that are present. So there's lots of ways to leverage and help your teachers take advantage of the different components that are available to them. That they might not be using, they might not be aware of, but just letting them know all the different ways that they can reflect and engage and continue their planning processes without that heavy time investment. So I think Emily's done a great job of highlighting how this tool can be truly collaborative at your district, how you can have oversight as a leader to understand what lesson delivery looks like at your campus and support teachers as they go more in depth with using these different components.
Wonderful. Love that. Thank you, Terra, because it is a we effort, right? So this helps add emphasis onto that. The next part is going to be the real meat of talking about the data analysis and the lesson planner. So these are truly taking the lesson planning component best practices and tying them to data analysis. So what we're going to start with is that standard coverage report. And so this is one that every time I went out to a PLC and we're utilizing both tools, I said, make sure we have that standard coverage report. And so what that report allows you to see is historically, how many times have you taught that standard? And so you can see that in the screenshot on the right. You're going to get a little check mark on your piece of paper icon when you have taught that standard. And then in the history below, you're going to see every day you taught it this school year. And so you get that information immediately. You can also, what I'm referring to, though, is a full encumbered report that's in the very top of this panel, that allows you to print the full report to show you, here's every time you taught all of the standards that you have associated with your curriculum box there. So if it's third grade math, you can see all the standards, and here's all the times that you taught them. So when you think about the power of that, next to data analysis, that in and of itself is a very powerful thing. Of course, keeping this in mind. So then I laughed and just told some of the rest of the team, I've actually done a full day training on this one slide. One slide, full day training. But best practices relating for attaching standards are really, you get out of it what you put into it. And you hear that for so many things. And so I used to work with teachers who would try to add almost every standard to their lesson planner every day. And I was like, I love where your head's at, but wow, I don't think you're able to teach every standard every day. And they really viewed it as, you know, a checkbox. I just want to feel like I'm checking that off. And so when we go back to the purpose of the lesson planner and how it all ties together, then you should really only be adding around 2, and I say no more than 5 standards really on a daily basis. And so if you're not seeing the student show evidence of that learning or of that skill set, then it really shouldn't be added to your planner. Because if you haven't captured evidence of student learning, then all you did was talk to students during the day and you have no observation for how they learned that content. So it's better to attach a few, maybe even just one, that you're really making sure that students have a deeper understanding of that standard. Again, attaching those process standards as you're utilizing them. So if kids are demonstrating that process while they're learning the content, absolutely add it to your lesson planner. That's huge, because then you can go back and say, here's all the times that I covered that process associated with this content area. In addition to being sure to include, what stimuli did you utilize? Was it a graph? Was it a chart? What did you use for that process standard and for that content area? Because having all 3 of those is like liquid gold when you're really trying to figure out, where do I need to go from here? Which is the question that we always land on at the end of data analysis. Where do I need to go? So again, making sure that you're really only attaching a certain amount of standards based on all of that criteria. What am I teaching? What am I formatively assessing? And more importantly, what did I gain evidence of for student learning? And so it kind of ties me back to, why is that so important? You know, why was that a slide? Why could that be a full day of training? Why is that so important? And it made my day, because I helped some teachers in training not that long ago and covered the same information. And then when I said, why is this important to a brand new teacher who's new to the profession? She said, because if you don't add the standards according to what you taught, then your standard coverage report's not going to be accurate. And that's not going to help you when you're analyzing data. And I think I cried a little bit. I think emotionally it got to me and I cried. That was a magical moment. So that is why it's so important, is to make sure that when you go through data analysis and you're looking at how your students did, you have something that's accurate to compare it to. So then it's apples to apples. And you're saying, here's how many times I taught it. Here's what I used. Here's the DOK level. And here's how they performed.
I think another important kind of question for reflection and thinking here that I've had lots of times when I've been working with teachers is differentiating teaching and learning. We can teach all day, but if we're not pausing for those measurements, do we have a gauge? Do we have a compass on whether students have learned or not? And I think that goes really well with making sure we're tagging standards as we are addressing them, as we are measuring them, either formatively or summatively. within our classrooms to have a really good indicator of what we have been able to effectively cover throughout the year.
So now, since I already kind of led the way down to the DOK path, we're talking about how much we love DOK. So let's talk about it a little bit more. Why not? So these are just scenarios that I'm kind of throwing out there, but I've lived this in every day being a district instructional coach. So we start to go out and look at data, and then we start having these conversations. I taught content at, this one was a rare conversation. I taught content at a DOK level 3, but only assessed at a DOK level 1. And so when we come to that conclusion, what's our good news? What's our bad news here? And like I said, that one's an ironic situation, but I'm giving you the extremes on each end. But the good news is you're able to understand if students even understood the foundation of what you taught since you were teaching it at such a high level. Yay for you. But the bad news is we did miss an opportunity to assess at that higher level. So that's okay. We have embedded classroom evidence of learning, surely. And so we can take that and we can combine that with future tests. And like I said, worse things have for sure happened. Here's normally the scenario that we find ourselves. I taught content at a DOK level 1, but I assessed at a DOK level 2. And these are the PLC meetings that you come to and teachers have their data that they just went in and reviewed and aware, and they're really upset. These are those meetings that I don't like. Because the understanding of this is just now happening, which is the sad part. And so we taught at a foundational level, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely necessary. But then when we created our assessment, we definitely asked students to perform tasks at a higher level. And so what happened here? Well, we didn't get the results we wanted, probably, but we were able to pre-test kids into that next level and see where they are. And we can take that data and use it instructionally for the next couple of pieces. But of course, that bad news is what you just walked into, is that room and how teachers feel is really the bad news. But you can, light at the end of the tunnel, you can weigh a lot of those questions at a level 0 or a weight of 0. And so you can get a little bit more accurate reading if not every question was asked at that level, so that you can see a little bit more realistic results. So again, there's always a positive outtake from these. And why is that so important? You probably caught wind of that. It's critical that your lesson plans document this level of instruction, and then any assessment given should reflect that DOK level that was taught. And so those should work in parallel. Therefore, you're not surprised. I always tell teachers we really shouldn't be surprised when we get our data back. We should really be able to say question 3 is going to be a problem, and I know why. We should have that much insight to our practice. And so before I move on to some more data analysis best practices, a couple of the things I want to reiterate is if you don't use forethought as a lesson planner, that's okay. I've worked with many teachers who they do a different method of lesson planning. But if your lesson structure allows you to go back and see how many times you've taught your standard, it allows you to see how you did that instructionally with DOK and what strategies that you used, then you're okay. As long as you can articulate those things and you really can see how many times was this taught and how did I teach it, then you're in the right place. Oftentimes I get in situations with teachers where they can't reproduce some of that. And then I wonder, are you working harder rather than smarter? And I don't like that for anybody. I like for the data analysis process to be seamless, and therefore you can bring these things up instantaneously. How many times did I teach it? What did it look like? Here's how they performed. Because what do we have in PLC time when we're looking at these? Usually 45 minutes or less. So we have to be efficient with our time on task. Then as we go into our last piece of data analysis best practices, some of this we talked about in our last session. It's going to be a good refresher, but we're just talking about it from a little bit different lens. And so we talked about the incorrect response report last time. It's still one of my all-time favorites, wins teachers over When you're not in a pandemic, you can get hugs for this report, but it allows us to identify students that have missed a certain question, but it also allows us to identify small group instruction, or when you see a whole list of student names, then, okay, we're reteaching this concept because every kid's name is under this particular question or skill set. So we now know what we need to do. In addition, then we have our constructed response report. And so that one is a great one for you to take that deep dive into. If I'm really talking about different DOK levels, what level was the student able to articulate from me? We can actually learn the most from what students are willing to say and type out to us, write out to us. That's going to give great insight into their thought process. And honestly, you can't reproduce that in a lot of other forms for testing. So great report to utilize under that manner. We did talk about this as well, that you can search and filter by essential standards. If you're familiar with creating a data view, this is probably the most powerful thing. When Terra discovered this and showed it to me, again, I think I had a moment where I either jumped up and was screaming or I had tears. It depends on the day, right? And so you can actually set a filter to look at certain standards. So it's a practice we do all the time in districts. What are your high priority standards and how did students do? Well, you can literally type in that number as a filter for a data view, and it's going to show you just those group of standards. So if that's your priority and you're looking at a STAAR report that has, 50 plus standards on it, not really, but it has a whole bunch, then you can easily filter out by some priority ones. Amazing to do. And it helps your brain. The more or the less information you have in a data view, the more you can do with it.
And this is a great connection back to what Emily was talking about at the beginning of our time together, spending time at the beginning of the year to identify those low performance standards. Then you can have your data analysis to track that throughout the year and see if your instruction this year is leading to gains in those areas. So great complement between the lesson planner and then your data analysis.
Yes, very true. An efficient way to monitor programs. Are the programs and initiatives you're putting into place instructionally working? That is an easy way for you to identify that. So the next piece that we have is one of my favorite reports. Actually, every time I went and worked with teachers, they said, will you create me that report where the learning standards are right next to each other and I can see them over time? And so I absolutely did that. But now that I work for eduphoria, teachers have the ability to create this report on their own. So that's beautiful. They can line up assessments side by side. So this one has 5 different assessments, and then we can see it all by learning standards over time. And so how are students doing with these skill sets over time as we introduce them, as we get deeper into them, all of the above. So that is a great staple for you to have as a data view, knowing that you can also roll your mouse over the standard and it's going to tell you what that standard is. And then very exciting news, because if you were looking at the last screenshot thinking, gosh, I just wish that that last data view you showed had DOK with it. Well, it will. Yay. So coming very soon in your data analysis, you'll be able to pull over DOK for analysis. So I'm going to pause because for me, this is a celebration. I put this in as a feature request for years when I was in a district. So yay, it's here. You can pull that field over and you can see in the screenshot below, you're going to be able to pull over learning standard and your question numbers, and you're going to be able to see what DOK was asked for that particular skill set. So, because a lot of times we get into a very quick misconception when we're analyzing test data, and we start saying the screen before was perfect. So standard 8.4C is a readiness standard, but you can see that as we went along, we had a major dip on our October assessment. And so that usually leads us down the path of, well, how did we ask that? What did it look like? Because if this was a DOK level 2 question, then it may be understandable that kids didn't perform as high, because the other 2 questions on the previous assessment were DOK level 1. Well, you're not comparing apples to apples. You are now comparing apples to oranges. And so it's not that kids don't understand that skill set. They don't understand it at that high of a level. So we need to scaffold back down, and we need to look into that question and that high level of questioning. So that reiterates a perfect example of how DOK being involved in that data view will answer that question for you immediately. Because if it did say DOK level 1, then what was that question? Why did we perform so low when historically we were doing so much better? And that provides you into insight, which it may, we're humans, it may not have been a great question. We need to go look and see what happened. But at least that eliminates you wondering initially what type of question it was. So very exciting here. I'm going to give a pause for Tara to do a woohoo too, because she's excited about this too.
Woohoo!
There it is. All right. We're almost
I want
done.
to get a woo. Can I give a woohoo too?
Yeah, Jason.
Don't leave me out. Woohoo!
That was good. That was amazing. And a good pause for that as well. So sorry. So if you've been looking for that or wondering about that, yay, it will be available very, very soon. So like very soon, very soon. So be looking for that field under data analysis for you to pull over and make even better data analysis decisions. So some of the last pieces that we have here are just a reminder that every time you create a data view, you can pull over, and we talked about filtering. You can filter by a monitor group or a student form. So if you are really trying to say, hey, I did intervention with this group of students, and I know that I did this, and this instructionally. I have it in my amazing lesson planner. Now let me see how kids did on this. And I really just want to see how my intervention students did. Pull over this group and filter by it. And now your data analysis is conclusive for just that intervention. All right. I've already talked so much. Oh my goodness. Okay. So you take it away, Tara, unless there's questions I can help answer.
I think we are good on the question, so we can move into our news and updates. So we are always looking for how to continuously improve and support our districts the best way possible. Some ways that will look in the coming weeks and months is the next item type that we will make available will be hotspot. So another pause for celebration of the wonderful progress our teams have made to get new item types into the hands of our district, so our teachers and our students can engage in this new interactive feature for online testing. Something that recently came out is draft printing. Thanks for celebrating in the chat with us. So this came as a need for our districts to be able to vet those assessments and be able to plan those items in a more collaborative fashion. So that draft printing is now accessible in a way that you can engage in vetting your assessment items. Emily just finished sharing with us about the DOK for data analysis. So again, this is coming very soon, and we're very excited for you to now have this additional layer when looking at your data from your assessments. And it will apply where you have tagged that DOK level to your individual assessment item. So this will be wonderful for you to go a little more in depth on that learning and reflecting from your instructional elements. As we continue with our new interactive response items, question credit will be something that we continue to work on, add more details to, so that you get an even richer data analysis. So this question credit and data analysis, these are both going to tie to those interactive response questions so that you can have a deeper understanding of how students are performing at the summary level instead of only seeing it at the level of an individual student. So these are all things to come. We're super excited to make this experience richer for you all. And as always, we love to hear what was meaningful. How did you benefit today? So if you could drop in the chat, what was your favorite best practice that you learned about today? Something new, maybe something that is now back on your radar, something you knew about in the past and forgot about. We'd love to hear in the chat what was something meaningful that brought value for you to learn about today in this session. Okay, seeing some stuff on the DOK and analysis. Thanks for celebrating with us. We are very excited to get this layer of data analysis in your hands, seeing the learning standard indicators from the lesson planner as a celebration today as well. Continue to let us know what was valuable to you as we wrap up in the next few minutes. We love hearing your thoughts, and this really helps us drive the instructional elements we continue to provide for you.
And then, sorry, I added this one, Terra. Y'all keep adding your feedback in the chat. It's really making my day, by the way. So thank you. Y'all are adding such sweet things that you liked learning about today. But here we do have an opportunity for teachers, educators, anyone really. We are looking for anyone who's interested to help us build STAAR release assessments and aware, of course, for compensation. But we are trying to get those assessments in there as quickly as possible. And we're trying to help add content supports as well. So if you have any experience in building assessments, check. If you have experience creating content clarifiers or helping with those supports, that's a double check. Then you may want to fill out this form and let us know that you're interested. If you're thinking that tiny URL is not quite tiny enough, I agree with you. We will send out some information to you with the recording, and we'll include this link for you to fill out our form if you're at all interested in helping us with this project that we're taking on to better support our districts as quickly as possible. And then
Go ahead.
We can wrap us up, or however, this is our very last one. We will be at TAC this year. Please come by the booth. Jason, Tara, and I will all be there. You can put a face to a voice, which is always fun to do. We would love to, if it's appropriate, shake your hand and tell you hi and answer questions, or just meet you. So please come by and see us. We'll be there. And if you haven't, make sure you sign up for our news and emails, because we'll be sending out information about DOK, yay, and all other things that are new. So make sure you follow us on all those different forms and catch up with us, because we love you being in the know. And thank you most of all for being here. We really appreciate y'all. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you.